Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Just real quickly, there's a Q&A box, hopefully it's to the right. I posted a tech number in there in case anyone's having technical issues logging in or getting booted out. If you want to write that number down, go ahead and pass it on to your colleagues. Also, please post any questions in there that you will have for the panelists. We'll cover those questions towards the end of the presentation. So hopefully about the last 10 to 15 minutes, we can cover any questions that you guys may have. So we'll get started. I'd like to take this time to introduce our two speakers for today. You guys are joining Homelessness and Sex Trafficking today. We have with us Dr. Shantae Williams. She is the statewide program administrator for the Susanna Wesley Community Center's Trafficking Victim Assistance Program and Beacon of Hope, which serve victims of human trafficking through intensive case management and outpatient treatment. We also have with us Terry Lynn Lum, who has been the program director for the Children's Justice Center of East Hawaii Island since July 2008. Thank you both for being here and welcome.
Thank you for having us. So for today, I'm going to start off and I'm going to give more of a statewide and Oahu kind of centric perspective. And then Terry's going to follow up and talk more about the neighbor islands so that you can kind of get a full picture of what's happening. So I'm going to share my screen. 1 second. Okay. Starting off with who we are, just so that you understand the perspective that we're coming from and the way that the lens that I'm going to be talking from today. So Susanna Wesley's Trafficking Victim Assistance Program, we call it TVAP for short. We have the statewide contract for the Department of Human Services Child Welfare that falls under the mandate, saying that any child that you suspect or know is trafficked needs to go, a call needs to be made to child welfare, and then we, as their contracted agency, gets it and we provide services. So our services range from crisis response. So we are 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We're going to respond if somebody knows or thinks that somebody's a victim. And then we also follow up with this comprehensive case management. In order to do this, we have our formal partners, which is PACT. They help us cover Oahu, and then they also cover Maui County. And then Halekipa covers Kauai and the Big Island. And we also work with Oloho Clinic, who does our trauma assessments. Our adult survivors, we only are able to do full coverage. Our grants only cover Oahu. So we will do what we can on neighbor islands, but for adults, it's mainly Oahu. And the Pacific Survivor Center helps us with those grants by providing medical. Hawaii Immigrant Legal Aid is for those who have immigration needs, and they go through legal aid. And then we also are part of the task force grant with Honolulu Prosecuting Attorney's Office. So when speaking, I'm going to give you the perspective from that first line crisis, also with what we're seeing with law enforcement, and then the medical and some of the legal things. But it's just a holistic view from our lens. Starting off with the definition, just so that you know what we're talking about. Quick and easy, it's sex trafficking is, if it's an adult, you have to be able to prove force, fraud, or coercion. So somebody is physically making them do it. They have tricked them into it by saying like, oh, this is a model agency, or they may use coercion by using love or relationship. It's important to note that if they haven't reached the age of 18, it's sex trafficking, clear and simple. You will hear a lot of times commercial sexual exploitation, or CSEC. That is the abbreviation that means if a child, somebody under 18, is exchanging sexual activity for anything of value. So this could be sexual activity, could be even pornography, stripping, having flat out sex, but for something of value or their promise thereof to the child or another person. So it doesn't need the third parties. It can be that the child is trading sex for drugs or a place to stay, and they would be considered a sex trafficking victim, a commercially sexually exploited child. So where does sex trafficking intersect with homelessness? These are not all encompassing, but I think they kind of capture the three, kind of capture what we're seeing. So the first is poverty. And with poverty, the trafficker is going to target or try to recruit individuals who they know are struggling financially. It's just a very easy target. So we will see them going from public housing to the encampments to look for people who are struggling financially and make these promises of, I can give you a better life, or I can give you money, a means of getting money. So it could just be basic needs. Maybe they don't have food to feed themselves or their children, or as kids, if they're on the run, they need their basic needs to be met, or a substance abuse. I'm going to go a little bit more into these in a little bit. So if I'm going too quickly, hopefully I'll catch it later. Um, Encampments. So a lot of the times we see that the traffic individuals are coming or leaving an encampment site of where they're being trafficked. So they're going to look at these encampment sites, and then also sometimes it happens in the encampment sites. And so we spend a lot of time there, especially recently, trying to get the kids that are being trafficked out of encampments. There's also this intersection with the substance abuse that collides with homelessness, where individuals, if they themselves have a substance abuse issue, if their significant other has an issue, I hope this is not, something is happening here, sorry, or if they're parent. So that is a lot of times they are going to exploit the substance abuse issues in order to make them trade sex in order to get that need fulfilled. And then we also see it where it intersects with mental health. There was a large segment that they did. Dr. Chad Koyanagi and Josh Green were doing that segment on mental illness and the homeless population. And where we're seeing is a lot of them, because sometimes it's just that people don't believe them. Like they are speaking, they think, oh, they're speaking crazy when they're saying different things are happening to them, but they're also, a lot of times they're trafficked themselves. So the types of trafficking, for those of you who know, I didn't want to just like run it in the ground, but we also need to cover for those who may not know. But I'm doing it from the perspective of the homeless and encampment when I'm giving these examples. So the first type is familial, where a parent, a guardian, it could be Hanai, whatever, they are taking this child and they're saying, you know, I'm going to trade my child for money or for sex or for sexual pleasures or for drugs. So in the encampments, what we're seeing a lot of times is that the families that are engaging in this type of behavior, the parents have a severe substance abuse issue. And maybe it's a single mother, but they have traded all that they can trade, and the drug dealer is no longer interested. And so they're going to trade their child. For gangs, we see it a lot of times in parks that have a lot of gang presence. Like, for example, on Oahu, Dole Park was one of the very famous ones where we were having a lot of issues with the gangs controlling the kids. So the child would run away and think that they're just going to sleep in a park innocently enough, but the gang would first offer support or offer safety, but then the child in exchange would have to have sex with either, it would start with other gang members, and then it goes to individuals outside, to where they have them working the streets. And it's not just Old Park. I just use that as an example. We also see a lot of that on different sides of the island. A lot of the homeless encampments and parks are gang controlled. Then we have pimp controlled or trafficker controlled. That's with the male or female. And what we're seeing with this in the homeless encampments is a lot of times it will be an individual who may have more means than the other. So this individual may be a drug dealer or just have access to a greater finances. And they often will have a what they call a bottom or a recruiter, which is a female. And in the encampments, it appears to be an older auntie type female. So this auntie will be like, she'll use drugs, but they'll say she's not bad like the others. She's not bad off. So she's able to keep herself looking better. And when the kids wander into these parks or encampments, they are coming as more of a motherly role, and then they're going to introduce them to the trafficker. But they do it in a way of, you know, this is my guy and he supports us and I'm going to take care of you. And so we see that type on the streets and the hotels and everything, but more so in the encampments, I see that they'll often talk about an auntie or an uncle who they find is protective, that doesn't do as many drugs, and they feel like it's safer when it's really not. And then what we're seeing more than anything out at the encampments is survival. So they're going out and they don't have food to eat. They don't have basic resources, a bed to sleep in. And so the child will end up trading sex in order to stay. We'll oftentimes see an individual, it could be male or female, with a much older, unevenly matched, to put it lightly, a partner. And this individual, we're talking like a 15, 16-year-old is going to have a 50-something-year-old boyfriend who doesn't even have all his teeth, but she thinks she loves him because he takes care and protects her. So what we try to tease out for that was, would you have been with that individual if you weren't in this situation, to try to help them understand? But that type of relationship will also fall under trafficking. So what's the pushes to trafficking happening in the homeless population? I talked about some earlier, but like the pervasive mental health. So we have traffickers who the psychiatrists, social workers, therapists will reach out and say, this individual is targeting those with severe mental illness outside of my establishment. We have victims that we work with that say, yeah, I met him outside of my psychiatrist's office. So it's easier because it's harder for people to believe. It's harder for them to communicate that something is going on. Then you also have the pervasive substance abuse, which I've talked about. If a person has a serious substance abuse issue, especially if they're young, if they're in the LGBTQ population, if they female, they are more than likely going to exchange, just because it's easier to feed that habit. It's the easiest way. If you don't have anything else, that's what they often say to me, is like, well, I was stealing and then I got caught too many times, or I sold everything I had and I didn't have anything else to sell, so I sold my body. So if you're working with that type of population, you do want to tease this out. Hawaii's high cost of living, it is very difficult for people to get themselves out of that type of situation. Like it's not like you can go and work at a quick McDonald's job and be able to survive out here. And so that is also a push. Families or individuals experiencing poverty and homelessness, it is not uncommon for victims that we work with to have been born on the streets. You know, like they go from the hospital, mom and the family bring them back to the tent. And so when you're growing up like that, a lot of times people are going to just constantly be targeting, running away, or being kicked out of the family home. I talked about how they just aren't able to survive, and they oftentimes end up in encampments. And then COVID-19, we saw a very sharp shift, and it was because, number one, the hotels were closed when we had the lockdown, so that pushed them out into the streets. And then those who were trafficked in hotels, and then also because the tourists were gone, so now they're really going to have to target the locals. And the police were policing the popular areas, so they did go out to the parks in the outskirts. We also see a lot of it happening in the neighbor islands, where they will report saying staying in trap houses, or at abandoned hotels and different things like that. And then vulnerable populations on the street. So anybody, if they have a physical disability, we've worked with people who were trafficked who have one or no legs and different things like that. So if you are seeing the signs of trafficking within this population, and it's very pervasive, then you need to reach out. It is difficult for, like with the pervasively mentally ill, to treat, because they have so much going on that they often run back. And we do work closely with Scott Morishige, the governor's coordinator on homelessness, and he has these outreach teams that go out, and they're amazing. Like, they are hardcore. They go, and their people have really severe mental illness, and they are able to tell us, like, report, oh, I think this person is trafficked. And a lot of times we already know of the person, or it's somebody that we're trying to find, but it's just really difficult for all of us to help them just because of what they're going through. So when we're trying to tackle trafficking in the homeless population, it's, as with anything, it's not just one organization or one person that can do it. So we all bind together. And that's what Terry's going to talk about, how we do that in a little bit. So just so you know what it's kind of looking like for Susanna Wesley's TVAT program, I just took a rough estimate from January 2019 to September 2020. And side note, we do have a new database starting, so our numbers will be able to be a lot firmer and assured next time around if I get invited back or anything like that, because we do have a data tracking system, but this was prior that we took this snapshot. And during that course of time, we had 89 referrals. 62 of them were youth that were confirmed and 27 were adults. So these are people that, yes, they fit the definition. They are trafficked. Out of that, we provided 163 services. So it may be that they were high risk, it may be whatever, but they were provided services. And then out of them, at the very minimum, 42% of that total population had stayed in a homeless encampment at one time. It could be that they have a safe family home, but it happened, they were trafficked in the encampment, or it could be that they were already houseless. And so, but I think that is it's almost half of the trafficking population that we served during that time had at one point been trafficked in the homeless population. So identifying potential victims in this type of population, like what are you going to look for? What are some of the things? And like I said earlier, it's not everything, but these are kind of like the quick and dirty things that you want to kind of tune into. A minor living in an encampment without their parents. That is a lot more common than you think. So if you see a minor there, don't assume that the person that they are with is their parents or that their parents are there. If they're willing to talk to you, you can talk and ask, especially if you do outreach type of things. But if they don't, that is a very big indicator. High risk individuals, so like I said, female, LGBTQ, young males who appear dirty or exhibit poor grooming. You can always tell with like the fingernails, the feet. Those are the telltale signs that we're looking at to see that they're not getting a regular grooming. They're somewhere where they're being exposed to like these types of living situations. When we go and we will do sting operations with law enforcement and we're looking for a particular kid or we've heard different things and we go into these encampments, it's not sanitary, it's very dirty and bad enough to be trafficked. But then you take that, the trafficking, and then you put it into these some of these encampments and it's really bad. Some of them, I must say, really work to try to keep their stuff clean, right? They really try to band together and make sure bad things aren't happening, but a lot of them, bad things are really happening. We've had individuals losing virginity on boxes out, you know, a piece of cardboard out in the middle of the mud because they were sold high enough for drugs. So you want to look for that, like the unclean clothes that seem dirty, dingy. A lot of times they don't smell that great. And that, if you think about it, if they're not smelling that great and they're not clean, the people who are purchasing them are not even the normal buyers, you know, and so they have a lot more risk of getting a lot more of those more serious diseases, or because they're not at the best level, sometimes they have to do what they have to do, as they put it, and that may mean not using protection. So it's much higher risk in this population. And minor with a significant older person, I talked about that earlier. High risk individuals hanging out with gangs, leaving the encampment at a certain time. So we had reports of like, we found some of the girls we work with in the Kakako area because they were leaving. The outreach team would see them leaving at about 6 p.m, looking like they were going to a club or somewhere, and then coming back early in the morning, looking a little tired, still in the same outfits. And after watching these patterns, we were able to figure out that they were being trafficked. And so they were coming and going from the camp. Present of money or expensive item in a homeless setting. I think that that's just easy. A lot of times they're going to have phones. They don't get to keep them for long, but they may have phones, or they may have hot pots or different things that you say you want to be like, well, how are they being able to afford those types of things? And it might be that they're being exploited. So what do you do once you identify a victim that you either know or you suspect? The first thing you have to do is recognize Public Law 114-22, which basically says if you are a mandated reporter, so if in your job you need to check for suicidality, abuse of elderly, all those good things, you now need to see if they report anything about trafficking, you have to report it to the child welfare line. And these are the numbers that you would call if you suspect or know that a child is being trafficked. And then what happens when a referral is made? So you report your suspicion to DHS, and then they'll make a referral to Susanna Wesley's TVAP program. So if the person that you're saying, I believe, is exploiting this child is a family member, DHS is going to come right alongside us, and we're going to go out together and try to figure out what's going on. If it is a non-family case, they just divert it directly to Susanna Wesley, and we'll go out and assess and figure out what's going on. We will make the determination by conducting what is called a trauma assessment or narrative. And the trauma assessment is a validated tool that Dr. George Rhodes from Olaho Clinic created. And it's been peer reviewed, and it has a very high validity and reliability that shows that by the child's score or different things, if they are trafficked. And so we will utilize that. We have clinicians that conduct those assessments. Or if the kid is, some of them are just like, yeah, this is happening and this is what's going on, we'll do more so of a narrative. So getting help when you call child welfare, or if you call them and you still need this additional help, for minors, you can call Susanna Wesley's TVAP line. That is our 24 hours a day crisis line. Like if you're like, okay, the person is here and I've made the call, but I need somebody here. Child welfare, if it's a kid and they're in danger, they would go right out. But sometimes they won't because it's not requiring that type of, the parents could be there, they could be healthy. So TVAP will go out. If it's an adult, will go out on the island of Oahu, and it takes about 30 minutes. If you're on the neighbor islands, you could still, for a child, you still call TVAP, and we'll try to get our subcontracted agencies to go out. Some of them have dedicated workers that will go out immediately. The others, we may have to send somebody out. It just depends, but you can call. And then you could also call Hawaii Cares, because on certain islands, they are aware and they're willing to help if it's a trafficked individual. Or it could be that maybe they can't help with the trafficking, but they can help with the mental illness, or they can help with the substance abuse. So call for help. In emergency situations, please call 911. You can also call the National Trafficking Hotline. They are also mandated reporters. So if you call in for a kid, they will make that cross report to Child Welfare Services. And I had that number at the previous slide. And also, if you too, or you can also Google if you missed it. And then when you're doing this, if you are suspecting that there is a victim, adult or child, in an encampment or in any type of situation that is trafficked, don't approach. And that's not just for your own safety, because sometimes these people are controlled by very dangerous people, but it's also the kids. So you meaning well, going up and talking to them could get them in a lot of trouble. Like we sent our workers out one time to respond, and the people were saying, you know, did you tell? And so we had to be very clear, because we know what would happen. We had our people talking to some of the other people at the encampment, so that we were able to ensure them that that the individual didn't tell, so they wouldn't get in trouble. The other thing that we'll do when we do outreach is form relationships with those that appear to be the healthy leaders in these camps. Sometimes they have people who really are trying to look out for the child. And we've gone out, and like one of our crew, they went out and they were talking to a kid, and the group first said, no, she doesn't stay here. You know, they denied everything. We knew they were lying, but we said, okay, we're just trying to help. And we kept going, and then they said, what do you want? And then we said, we want to help. And they finally were able to help us and lead us to where she was staying in the camp, because they wanted to help her. And what they said is, you know, you got to help her because somebody's going to kill her. You know, like the reason why they were guarding it is because they were afraid, like they said, you know, in their camp, she was sleeping with a lot of the women's significant others. She was doing a lot to steal and drugs to make it to keep herself going. She had been out there since 8-year-old, and by 13 she was by herself. Her family was all gone. And the day that my staff were able to, they took her there. They took the camp leaders took my staff to her tent. They could see 3 men coming out of it just right there. So if you can cultivate relationships with those who really care and who will really help out there, because that's how you're going to keep everybody safe. So that's the end of my portion. I know it was very fast. I'm sorry. I hope I covered enough. but I do have our 24/7 hotline on. If you know or you have questions, please reach out. There's always going to be somebody who answers, and they always know how to get directly in touch with me, or you can email me at the email below. Thank you.
Shantae, there is some questions. Not sure if you want to wait till after Terry to answer, but I know it's pertaining more to your towards your presentation.
Sure.
Okay, let's see. One of the questions is, are any traffic out of state? Is there data on that?
We didn't track it, but we definitely have them that are trafficked out of state. And so what that looks like, sometimes with the kids, they're sent back on the interstate compact. So that's where, if our kid is, like, say in Vegas, because this has happened, and they are identified in Vegas, then Vegas child welfare is going to contact ours, and they're going to send them back to us. And they'll do that a lot of times because if that kid is like, well, if they're making them a lot of money, to be honest, or if they're afraid that somebody is going to come and get that kid from them, they will move them out. So I can't tell you exactly how many that we have worked with because I haven't crunched those numbers, but we definitely have seen that. And we've also, the opposite way, we've had kids that law enforcement calls and say, hey, can you respond? So when law enforcement gets a victim, a lot of times they'll call us so that they have an advocate. And it's somebody from Ohio. And her family doesn't know or doesn't even care she's here, but she's here just for a couple of weeks. There's a thing called the circuit where they move them from certain states. And in Hawaii, we're a part of that circuit that goes from California here or from Vegas here and back, because there's low prosecution here. And then they're also, it's high. They make a lot of money here. So on the mainland, where they might be making $20, $40 for 15 minutes, in contrast, here, they're going to make between 100 and 250.
Okay, so there's a handful of questions coming in, but if you want, we can let Terry go and then we can go back to that. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I guess you're passing the baton to me now. And so I'm Terry Lum. I'm the program director for the Children's Justice Center here in East Hawaii. And I just want to thank Shantae for sharing her time with me, and to our conference coordinators for inviting us to be a part of this presentation. It's so important for me to be able to have contact, and as Shantae was saying, for us to develop relationships with other people working in the community. Specifically in child sex trafficking, because number one, a lot of times the youth who are involved in this do not see themselves as victims. So they wouldn't normally come into our system like other child abuse victims, because again, they're not thinking they have anything to disclose, because they think that they're a little bit more in control than they actually are. The other thing is that it is also a crime that the victims themselves, as well as the people around them, are generally very much more concerned about making a report because of the danger to them if someone finds out they made a report. So we're those of us who are working in government are really a little bit at a great disadvantage, because there's so many barriers to youth being identified and for reports being made. However, the only way that we can become involved is if someone actually makes a report about a concern about a youth. So I'm going to share my screen with you, and I know a little bit is going to be repetitive to what Shantae has already shared, but if you can just bear with me, I will do my best to try to skip over the parts that may be repetitive. So as I mentioned earlier, I work for the Children's Justice Center in East Hawaii. There are 5 centers across the state. There's 2 here on the Big Island in Hilo, where I work, and in Kona, our main center on Oahu. And then we have a center on Maui that serves all of Maui County, and one on Kauai. And just so that you, if in case you aren't familiar with our program, we are a program of the state judiciary. And we, on each of our centers, are fully accredited by our national organization called the National Children's Alliance. And so our centers were first created in 1986 by our state legislature. It was intended to ensure a fair and neutral process for handling reports of primarily child sex abuse at that time. And the intent was, again, as part of the judiciary, is we wanted to be able to ensure a process that protected the rights of all persons involved, and that includes our victims and the alleged offenders. So the first center on Oahu was established in 1986. We are modeled after a program that started in Huntsville, Alabama, by a district attorney who was concerned about being able to provide a coordinated response to specifically child sex abuse at the time. And Hawaii was one of the first 5 states to adopt this similar model. And the idea is that we work very closely with what we call our multidisciplinary team, and to be able to have, like I said, a comprehensive, coordinated system response to reports of child abuse. So our first center opened on Oahu. A couple of years later, the legislature appropriated funds to create centers on the neighbor islands, like I just mentioned to you. And then in 2001, they expanded our legislative mandate to include cases of serious physical abuse and child witnesses to crime. And we, at that time, we went from being called children's advocacy centers, as they are called across the country, to children's justice centers. So the goals as identified by the legislation that created our centers, which is HRS 588, was to primarily provide a supportive, home-like, fair and neutral setting for children to be interviewed about reports of child abuse and neglect. So the only way that a child comes to our centers, and we have specialized interview rooms and specialized staff that are trained to conduct interviews of children in a what we call a fair and neutral fact-finding manner, is if a report is made either to child welfare services or to the local police department or to one of our federal law enforcement agencies. If those reports come in, then those are the agencies that will contact us to arrange for an interview at one of our centers. The goals of our program are to minimize the numbers of times that children are interviewed and the numbers of people that have to interview them. And that's why working together as a team is really important, so that we attempt to interview children one time if we can. It sometimes is multiple times, but we really try to minimize the numbers of times and the numbers of people that interview children. And when that happens, because we work in a team concept, both child welfare and the police can be here at the same time. They hear the same thing. They get copies. Our interviews are recorded, and they get copies of the DVDs of those interviews, so that we are not having to have police interview children, child welfare interview children, later on prosecutors interviewing children. It's just, we try to make it be as much of a one-stop shop as possible. We also provide specialized training for the different professionals that are involved in these cases. And a large part of what we do is try to keep everybody involved with each other, connected to each other, so that it says here, coordinate the activities of all the agencies involved with a child and provide a case tracking system. That doesn't mean that we tell other people what to do. What it really means is that we have a mechanism for keeping all the different agencies involved in contact with each other, so that we can know what each other is doing, and we can provide, like I said, a coordinated response to children and their families. I'm trying to move my, just to give you an idea of why that's so important. This is a list of the agencies in East Hawaii that are involved in our multidisciplinary teams specifically regarding child sex trafficking. About 4 years ago, around the time that public law that Shante referenced was coming into being, the CJC statewide felt like we needed to have a more coordinated response to child sex trafficking. So we have, since 2017, been having a series of meetings, statewide meetings and trainings, to pull our specialized teams together so that we can address these cases appropriately. So this is a team on East Hawaii. It's very similar to teams on all the other neighbor islands as well. But we have monthly meetings with representatives from Child Welfare Services, from our police department, Susanna Wesley Center, so Shante and her staff also participate with us. As she mentioned earlier, the subcontractor on Hawaii Island is Halekipa. So we are in contact with them as well. Our Missing Child Center out of the Department of the Attorney General's office also works with us. Our prosecuting attorney and their victim assistance unit works with us. We have a representative from Child and Family Service that does counseling and supportive services to victims and their families. Department of Health, Child and Adolescent Mental Health Division, our Juvenile Client Services branch, which some people know as our Juvenile Probation Office. Salvation Army Family Intervention Services provides on Hawaii Island our crisis emergency shelter for youth on our island. We also have the state parole officer assigned to our island for juveniles, as well as our YWCA that provides sexual assault support services, in addition to ourselves. So you can see that we're looking at a wide variety of agencies that may become involved in a case. And if we were all operating just sort of independently of each other, it would be chaos. So our teams are designed to try to pull us all together and at least be able to talk to each other about cases. It becomes critical for us too, because as I mentioned earlier, these are not cases that generally come to us in the traditional way of somebody calling into a child telling a teacher, for example, that they're being abused at home. And then that's how that comes in. These are cases that require a little bit more outreach, or actually a lot more outreach, similar to what Shantae was saying about working with homeless encampment staff or people who are working in those out in the streets, is that we rely on other people to be able to be the eyes and ears so that reports can come into our system, and then our system response can start its work. There are similar, like I said, similar teams like this on all of the neighbor islands. Shantae's already talked about the mandated reporting, but I just have to underscore how important that is, because especially in child sex trafficking, some of you may be very familiar with the mandated reporting statute around child abuse. And generally people say that it is primarily reportable if it involves a parent, a caregiver, or someone living in the home with a child. Child sex trafficking, the child sex trafficking statute, though, is slightly different than that. And I'm going to share that in right here. So this is what she was talking about. Shantae was talking about Public Law 114-22, which was the Justice for Victims of Trafficking Act. It also required states then to include it in their child abuse reporting statutes. So in 2017, DHS began operating a 24-hour hotline to receive calls of suspected cases of human trafficking of minors, including sex trafficking. And this is the vital difference. It includes all suspected cases, regardless of the relationship between the suspected trafficker and the minor. So we're no longer bound by that whole thing about parent or legal caregiver or someone living in the home. This statute says that if you have concerns about a child, regardless of who you think is taking advantage of them or exploiting them, regardless, that is a call into this child welfare services hotline. And that's what's going to trigger the system response to that. Shantae already talked about what happens when that report comes in. All cases regarding sex trafficking or suspected sex trafficking is forwarded to her program. And she was also saying that if the hotline staff believe that there is also an element of a parent being involved or someone living in the home being involved or somehow contributing to the situation, then they can also assign it in the traditional way to a CPS or child welfare services worker, and they will conduct an investigation similar to any other investigation that they may do for any other kind of abuse and neglect that may be reported about a child. So I'm gonna switch out my visual here and share with you this. We were trying to explain a little bit about how our system worked. And if it looks a little confusing to you, imagine that if you're a child in a family, how confusing it is for them too. But this is a little visual that we've developed to be able to explain this to some of our community partners about what happens when a report gets made. Here in East Hawaii, we have a county council member, Matt Kanieli Kleinfelder, who has taken a special interest in sex trafficking in our community. He had gotten information from another researcher that, this is a very unreported crime in our community, that we really needed to come together as a community to identify high-risk youth. And as Shantae has said, it is our youth on the run. It is oftentimes our youth who have already had a history of sex abuse that have become the most vulnerable to persons who want to exploit them in this kind of way. So, we're trying to figure out how to be in contact with other community agencies. So our county council member has pulled together a group of different community members, including representatives from Hope Services. So if any of you on this presentation are from Hope Services and you're working with Dr. Kalani Spain, he is also on that community group, and is actually looking to do a community event, I believe next month, just to be able to, again, make contact with different people and provide them information about the services that are available to them in our homeless population. But this graphic just gives you a little bit of an idea of what happens when the call comes into child welfare services or a report goes into the police. So either way is effective in order to be able to get a community response or an agency response to any reports. We've already talked about how Susanna Wesley Center gets involved. If it is a youth that is missing or is considered a runaway, our agencies will also contact the Missing Child Center, and they are responsible for assisting various law enforcement in terms of locating missing children. As I mentioned earlier, if the hotline believes that the parent or caregiver is somehow involved in this, then they would assign it for a child welfare services investigation. And then we're also looking at all the different community providers and treatment providers that could become involved. In the middle and the grayed out boxes, you see that children can be interviewed at our center if they are suspected to be victims of sex trafficking. Each of our centers has full-time forensic interviewers on staff who are specially trained to interview children who are victims of all kinds of crime, but they have all gotten specialized training on interviewing victims of sex trafficking. The specialized training is important because, again, these are youth that may not be the most cooperative with us because they don't necessarily see themselves as being victims, or be afraid of coming forward because the person who is exploiting them has threatened them, or for whatever reason has made them distrustful of law enforcement and other government agencies. So we are very keen around that and try to do our best to work together and work at the youth's pace as well. The SANE exam is a specialized, SANE stands for Sexual Assault Nurse Examiner. These are specially trained nurses that work through our YWCA to provide specialized medical exams of any kind for anybody who may have been sexually victimized. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we try to just keep on track of where the cases are throughout the system. And that's where, when you go back to that whole team of people, why we meet monthly and why it's important for us to be in contact with people like Shantae, because we need to be able to know what's happening in a case at any given time. For those of us on the neighbor islands, I want to say that the resources to be able to respond to cases are probably more limited than they are on Oahu. Shantae mentioned about trying to get their TVAP workers out, and I know for us in East Hawaii, we're not always able to get some of the assessments done right away because they have to fly people here to be able to do that, and that's true for all the neighbor islands. We are more limited in terms of placement options. So if we do locate a missing child that may have been on the run and we suspect has been trafficked, we're limited in the kind of placement options we have for them. None of them are 100% secure. They're not lockdown facilities. So a youth often comes into our emergency shelter and a few hours later is on the run again. So it's a very difficult population for us to work with, but we believe that working together as a team is a way to go for us around that. Shante, I don't know if there's anything else that you think I should add, but that's the general overview around how our system works. And I'm conscious of the time, and I did want to leave some time for people to ask questions. So I think I'm going to stop there and turn it
Thanks,
back over.
Terry. Yeah, I think that no, that was very well covered. That's what I would have said. And with the kids going to, I think, yeah, it is a difficult population. And I really liked how you said that they don't identify. And so they're not very grateful when we are disrupting their plans and what they're doing, or this individual that they think they're in love with. But from what we find, when they start to get healing is when it turns and the gratitude kind of shifts.
Thanks, Shantae. Thanks, Terry. Appreciate your expertise on this. We do have some questions and we have about 15 minutes if we want to kind of go through them. There's actually some questions that were put in the chat. I'm not sure if you guys can see that, but I can kind of read some to you. How are children being purchased? What's the process? Asking in order to identify signs.
If I understand the question, then just shoot it back at me. But how they're being purchased, first off, the means of how they're being purchased, they can, I guess, okay, so we can, let me start again, sorry. So they are being purchased directly off the streets. So that could be through somebody just driving up in a car, and then they're jumping in the car and doing what they call a car date. Online is a very big place where they're often purchased. There are certain websites that you can go to purchase an individual for sex. And sometimes they're doing it off of dating sites, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, various different apps they're using to purchase kids. And then also, I think it's interesting to talk about how they're paying. So sometimes they'll pay directly cash. Most of the times, I think it's directly cash for those in the encampments, and or drugs. They'll give whatever goods they have. Sometimes they're giving gift cards, but also there's some that if they have a organized pimp, if he's organized enough, they will take credit cards because they have the Square card and it's under a different business.
Okay. If someone makes a report from signs of child being trafficking, how long does it take for a worker or outreach to go and follow up on this child?
It depends on where you're located and if you're calling TVAP. So if you call the child welfare reporting line, from when they will send a referral to us, and it depends on when we get it. Sometimes it's typically we'll get it right now we're getting it between the first 24 to 48 hours. Sometimes it's longer depending on how busy the worker is. So we very, very rarely will get it the same day, just so that you know that. So if you're going through the child welfare reporting line, it is going to take a while for us to actually get the referral. From once we get the referral, depending on if it's a Wahoo, we have a 6-hour window where we have to first contact the suspected individual or parent guardian. On the neighbor islands, it's 24 hours. We are very grateful for our worker on the Big Island, Maui, Hilo side and Maui, they are a lot more accessible and willing to go out, or able to. It's not that the others aren't willing. Some of them have other jobs, but they're able to respond right away. And typically we like it to be, our preference is 30 minutes from when we receive the phone call. Now, if it's a child welfare referral, we will still try to make that 30 minutes, but we do have that 6 hours or 24 hours. And then if you call TVAP, you will get a call. Like if for some reason, sometimes the worker might be in a meeting, they may be using the bathroom or something because it's 24 hours a day. And so they will call you back within 30 minutes because whoever's on call, we say, whatever you're doing, check it every 30 minutes. And then they will call you back. From the time they call you back, if somebody's going to be dispatched, it's going to just take from wherever they're at, if they have to get dressed and then they're going to go out. So it could be anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour, just depending on where they're located.
Thank you. Terry, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I don't do want to speak for child welfare services, but they do also have a time frame of when they need to respond to any reports that get sent to their units. I want to say 24 to 48 hours is when they try to make first contact.
And for this contract, if it's the familial, they will at least attempt to make contacts. Because of the type of abuse this is, though, sometimes it's a little longer because they're going to try, if child welfare is involved, that means it's familial. So they're suspecting that whoever is taking care of this kid is doing it. So child welfare may wait. Let's say we get it on a Friday. They're probably going to wait till Monday to try to catch the kid in school because it's just safer for that child.
So should they contact TVAP directly?
After doing the report, you don't have to do the report first. We are going to direct you to do the report because you got to do the mandated report. So best practice is if you could call it in to the child welfare reporting line and then call TVAP.
Okay. Let's see, as a hotel employee sees some of the signs of trafficking, such as an older male with a young female and maybe looks suspicious, are there any protections for the hotel and employee if this is reported and it turns out to be a wrong report?
You can always do an anonymous report. And so I think that especially in that type of situation, if you're worried about making the wrong call, you can do anonymous. It's better that you call in case you're right than you don't call. And Homeland Security also has a reporting line that they check quite regularly. And you could call that number also. And I should have asked Mike Breedy over here because our morals department, he'll pick up that phone too, and maybe just be able to go out and do a check. Maybe it can be a welfare check or something like that. But yeah, I would err on the side of caution and just report it anonymously if you have to.
I do want to say too that the child welfare reporting statute does allow for immunity from. So if you're making a good faith report, the reporting statute, it provides some protections from people if you're concerned about being sued or something for wrongful reporting. There's a specific term for that. I'm sorry, I don't remember what it is, but there is an immunity clause in the statute. So I know there's some of that concern. I guess I always just tell people, that's probably one of the biggest things where any kind of child abuse, people are concerned about making a report because what if I'm wrong? Mm-hmm. And my question back to them is, but what if you're right? I mean, we'll never know unless you make the call and somebody goes out to investigate. So let me just add that.
I think too, it's also important with the trafficking, if it's not the parents, child welfare doesn't open a case on them, nothing like that. Like, so it doesn't put a taint on the family. Like if it's somebody that and you're like, well, these are good parents, they're not looking into them at all unless we find something while we're working with the kid.
Okay. The process of reporting sex trafficking to the victims getting help sounds lengthy. What if the victim is in imminent danger, possibly be led to another state or country?
I would say call 911. That is number one. And if you can always call TVAP. And like I said, Hawaii Cares, Neighbor Island, do Hawaii Cares. They can, because like on Big Island, they know that they're connected to the MDT. And then like on Maui, they have like their SANE team. So different teams have different islands have different teams that can ignite but it doesn't have to be lengthy. It is at the time. So if you have somebody imminently in front of you and you want help right there, if it's danger, 911. If you are just worried about that kid taking off, call TVAP. If we have to call at the tail end, we do that. Child welfare has given us the permission to respond and then backtrack because they know the delicate nature of this type of work. But depending on what's going on, we might say call 911. And we may go out there after the fact, we're not pleased, or wait in the rains. Like morals will kick in, and when they go, they'll call and we'll go with them. But just call the police if or you can switch around the order if need be.
I think we have one more question we can squeeze in. As a flight attendant, I see a lot of this. What's the best thing we can do to en route?
We've had some of the really good reports coming from the flight attendants, nurses, social workers, psychologists, and a lot of times the people just say something was off and they're following their intuition. You want to call it in, especially as a flight attendant. A lot of times it can become federal because now you've got that nexus where they were flying this individual to another state, or you may be helping them from like just disappearing, because there are some kids that we are really concerned about that we can't find right this second, and we're assuming that they're on the mainland. So I would call the police. Homeland Security, I believe, is the ones that we've responded with them before to the airport. They will come out, or wherever you're at. Like, I think that Morals and Homeland Security and the FBI, they're all very responsive when it comes to these types of cases.
Okay, one last question. If we are wrong about a relationship, are there consequences to the accused parties?
No, because they're found not guilty, right? Guilty until proven innocent. They will check it out because the laws, and whatever is causing you to be concerned. From what I find, it's very few that are wrong, but we err on the side of caution too, because we don't want to accuse anybody who's not doing it, and we don't want to mislabel an individual who isn't, a child who isn't a victim of trafficking. If you treat them and you provide the services as though they are, you could be teaching a very vulnerable child some information or some things that you don't want them to know. So, but no, they wouldn't. There's no stigma that goes, as long as you don't put them on blast on social media or something. There shouldn't be any stigma that's following them.
Okay, I think that's all questions that we have. Terry, did you want to add anything before we close?
No, but thank you for the invitation, opportunity to speak to your group.
Yeah, thank you for doing this. Yeah, we're super appreciative of this. For everyone that's still on, next session will be at 11:30. So we can end this session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.